Thank you for taking the time to listen to this message by Pastor Josh Cotts. We pray it blesses and encourages you throughout the week. If you'd like to know more about Living Word Church and the ministries associated with it, please visit our website at livingwordshawnee.org. So, it's good to have everybody this morning. It's I'm just very, very thankful that we have technology like this, even though it makes us mad sometimes. Technology frustrates us sometimes because it doesn't always work the way we want it to. But today it's working, it looks like. We were really worried that this wouldn't work out. We're using new software and everything to get this across, but it's all working out, so we're thankful for that. I feel like I have something really important for us this morning. I think it's vital for right now. I think it's going to be also even more vital for when we come out of this season, whatever is happening right now, everything that's going on right now. I think it's going to be extremely important for us as we go out of this season. Here lately, well, let me say this. We as a church, especially since Bailey and I inherited Living Word, we've been really pushing for the manifestation of gifts, spiritual gifts. We've been really pushing for everyone in our church family to find out what they're gifted in and to walk in it, to carry it out. And we've been really pushing service and all of that. And I don't mean church service, I mean service, like working with our hands, doing what we're capable of doing. And for some reason in this season, especially a couple weeks ago, I felt like I heard God just saying, just be right now. He's saying, just be. We've been focusing on making these gifts come alive, making these different things manifest that God has put inside of us. And now God, I feel like, is just saying, just be for just a second. Just be in this season. And honestly, I don't feel like this is a season of rest. I feel like what God is calling us to right now is actually different than just a season of rest. But I think it's so appropriate that God would do that while we're so focused on doing, that God is now like, be. He's just stop for a second and be. And he's even shut down everything. He has shut down everything. He has shut down church buildings. And I know, you'd be like, well, the virus did that. I honestly believe that God is using this time. I don't think God sent the virus. I know he didn't send the virus. It's not judgment or anything like that, but he's using this time to quiet everything in our lives so we can learn what it means to be the church. And I've been seeing a lot of people online saying, it's time to see, who the real church is. Like, it's time to really be the church because we don't have the church building anymore. And the thing is, whenever we talk about being the church, usually what we mean is it's in reference to what we do as the church. It's in reference to who we are as disciples of Jesus and what we do, whether it's praying for people, outreach, evangelism, preaching, teaching, prophesying, that's all being the church. We don't need a building to be able to do all of that. But I feel like right now in this season, God is saying, I want you to be the church, not in what you do, but just be the church. Being the church is not just about what we do. It is about who we are. We are the church. And so I feel like God is really zeroing in on identity in this season. And he's really wanting to pull out who we have made ourselves to be and who we are, so we can begin to see the person that we've tried to build in ourselves. So whenever I feel like God's saying be, he's saying be the church. Know what it means to be the church in your identity, who you are, not just in what you do. And I will often go back and listen to some of my old sermons. And the reason I do this is not because I love to listen to myself. It's if you're with me, it's hard to listen to yourself talk sometimes. But the reason I go back and listen to these old sermons is because, for one, I like to be able to critique myself so that I can improve. Two, I like to be reminded of what God has told me personally. And three, I want to see what progress I've made to foster what God put in me to carry out. To whenever he had me release a word, I believe that if you preach something, you need to make sure that you are fostering that word. You need to make sure that you are carrying out that word, that it's not just a one and done sermon like, I'm going to preach this, I'm going to get some claps and some amens, and that's it. No, if I preach something, I feel responsible to see that thing carry out. So I go back and listen to my old sermons to question myself, have I done what's necessary to carry out what God put in me at that time? And he brought me to this sermon that I did 5 years ago called "You Are a Cup." And the whole sermon, I had this cup, and the whole sermon was based on the fact that you and I were not created to do anything. To say that God would create me to serve, to be a servant, to do something is almost heresy in my opinion, because that says that God created somebody to do something because he wasn't capable of doing things himself. And so I believe that I was created to be filled by God. I believe that we were created to be filled by the presence of God. I believe that when he created us, even our bodies, he purposely made us a place where he could eventually dwell. Even Stephen says, Stephen says, God doesn't live in temples made by human hands. And so I believe God had that in mind, because if you read in Genesis, you see that really it's implied that God used his hands to make male and female, to make people. And so it's like he had this intention of making a dwelling place for his presence. And so I believe that I was created to be filled by God. I believe that I was created to be a temple for God, to be a dwelling place for him. I don't believe that I was created with the sole purpose of doing something for him. And so in this sermon, I related us to a cup. You see, a cup was created to be filled. That's why cups are created, right? We don't have just a cup, unless you want it to be decoration, like I'm looking up now and seeing that we have some cups set out just for show that we don't really ever use. But really, a cup was meant to be filled. That's why it was created. And so if I am that way, if I'm like a cup and I was created to be filled, then if I'm not filled, then I'm useless. Because whatever something was created for is what will actually how its purpose will be defined. So a cup was created to be filled, right? So that's its purpose. So if I'm not filled, if I'm like that cup and I'm not filled, then I'm without purpose. I'm useless. So the whole thing was like, it's time. We need to make sure we're getting filled so that we are actually useful whenever the time comes for us to be able to use our gifts. And then he brought me to a sermon that I did last year called Our First Love, in which I was talking about these different ministers who were coming out, saying that they no longer believed in Jesus. They were losing their faith. They were departing from Christianity. And I'm seeing it more and more and more. You see old musical artists, that at one point had really strict moral guidelines, who are now just like giving all of that up. And to me, that is leaving the faith, because if you're going against what God has commanded us and who he's commanded us to be, you're leaving the faith. And you're seeing all these different ones come out and say that. But the whole purpose of that sermon was to say that I feel like a lot of us tend to use our ministry to replace our relationship with God. It fuels our relationship with God. And if we do that, if we allow our ministry to fuel our relationship with God, then anytime our ministry wavers, so will our relationship with God. So our relationship with God is not meant to be based on what we do, ever. It's just not meant to be based on what we do. It's meant to be based on what God has put inside of us. It's meant to be based on what God did, on what he does, and what is inside of us, not on what we can do for him. So I was reading through the word and just kind of exploring some different things that I might want to talk about today. And I came across the story of the prodigal son. And so I want us to turn to Luke chapter 15. And I'll give you a second to turn there. Luke chapter 15. And we're going to be starting with verse 18. I just want to say that I have looked at this story from several different perspectives. I've taught it from several different points of view. A lot of people say that this parable should be renamed the Father's Love, or something like the love of the Father, because it really is a story about the Father's love. But God brought me to this story again. He does this a lot, but he brought me to this story again, and something jumped out at me that I actually haven't really thought too deeply about before. And so I want to start with verse 18. Everyone knows the story. It starts in verse 11. But everyone knows the story. The younger son asks his father for his share of the estate, for his share of the inheritance. And at that point, the father decides to divide the share of the inheritance between the two. Now, this was the younger brother that asked for his share, and so the father went ahead and gave the share to the older brother too. And one thing I want you to know about this culture, at that time, it would have been appropriate to the culture for the older brother to get double what his younger brother got. That's going to come into play later. But we know the story. The younger brother gets his share. He goes out and he spends everything on wild living. It says, we learn later that some of that was prostitution and things like that. But he goes out and he squanders his inheritance. And then in verse 18, we see him coming. It says he comes to himself. He's actually eating with the pigs at some point. He loses everything. He's eating with the pigs, and he comes to himself. And in verse 18, he says, I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men. So he got up and came to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion for him, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, quickly bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf, kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found. And they began to celebrate. I want to go back and I want to look at verses 18 and 19, where he says, I will get up and go to my father and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men. Make me as one of your servants. When I read this, I began to try and put myself in that position. This son had reached a point where he literally felt like he was no longer worthy to be called a son of his own father. Doesn't matter what blood ran in his veins. It doesn't matter who he looked like. He felt unworthy to be called a son. And he decided, I want to go back and ask my father to make me a servant because I'm no longer worthy to be called a son. When I saw this, I thought, I wonder if some of us we make our life about doing something for the Father because we feel like we're not worthy to be called sons. Like maybe that's why we're so obsessed with what we do. You see this on social media, on Facebook, people talking, and some people are just informing, but some people are actually bragging about, what they do, who they prayed for, what miracle they saw happen. And, we've probably all been guilty of it at some point, but for some reason, we've made our identity largely resides in what we do. We're largely identified by what we do. And I wonder if it's because some of us feel like we're unworthy to be called sons. Because this is the point that the prodigal son reaches here. Honestly, I feel like many believers, even though I feel like many believers are still prodigals. I feel like many believers are still prodigals, even though maybe they haven't left the faith. I feel like many believers are still prodigals, not because they've abandoned Jesus, but because they aren't living like sons, they're living like servants. To me, I believe that even if I believe in Jesus, I profess Jesus, I live for Jesus, my character is like Jesus, if I live as a servant and not as a son, there's still a part of me that is a prodigal. I am not meant to live as a servant. I'm meant to live as a son. And that to me is a scary thought, because we are sons and daughters. And I want you to know that whenever I say sons, I actually mean daughters too. So the Bible tends to say just sons, but I want you to know that I actually mean sons and daughters. And if I believe that if I can, as a guy, I can be the bride of Christ, then a girl can be a son of God. So there you have it. But I think we reach this dangerous perspective where we feel unworthy to be called a son because we feel like we have to be worthy to be a son, but we don't have to be worthy to be a servant. That's what it says to me. If we feel like we can live as a servant instead of a son, then it must mean that we feel like we don't have to be worthy to be a servant, but we have to be worthy to be a son. And actually, it's the other way around. God will give gifts to those that he deems worthy of what they can accomplish. But sonship is not something that I have to be worthy of. And I feel like I'm going to get deeper into this, but I feel like if we can get a hold of this, then something really explosive will happen after we get out of this season. But many believers, I feel like, still live as prodigals because their identity is wrapped up in what they do and not in who they are. So I want to read here, look at verses 21 through 23. It says, "And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, Quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf, kill it, and let us eat and celebrate." There is a very clear distinction that is made, especially right here, but there's a very clear distinction that is made between a son and a servant. I don't think you can be both. Maybe you think I'm a heretic for saying that. I don't think you can be a son and a servant, because a son serves. A son does serve, but a son is not a servant. And I'll prove it to you even more here in just a little bit. But I don't think you can be both. I think that on purpose, there is a clear distinction in this story that is made between a servant and a son. There is a clear, purposeful distinction that is made here. And it's a distinction that you and I need to learn. It's a distinguishment that you and I need to learn. A son serves, but a son is not a servant. Whenever my wife is pregnant right now, and whenever we have our kid, I'm not going to treat our kid like a servant. I'm not going to just order him around all the time and boss him around, because he's not a servant, or she is not a servant. He or she is my child. He or she is my son or my daughter, right? And I didn't just reveal a gender accidentally. We don't know yet. We're going to find out next week. But a son serves, but a son is not a servant. What's so beautiful about this moment right here, after the father completely shames himself, because it was, in that day, men should not run, because to run, they would have to pull up their clothes. They'd have to pull up their tunic, and doing that would expose their legs. And it was actually shameful to do that. And so the father shames himself, runs out to his son, embraces him, kisses him, and then the son is going to make his plea right here. He's like, listen, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight. And that's as far as he could get before his father was already like, no. I'm going to interrupt you right now. Just forget about whatever you're thinking. His father wouldn't even let him ask to be a servant. So I'm like, it's amazing to me. It's so beautiful, because what it says to me and what it says about us is that God is not even remotely interested in us being servants. He doesn't even want us to ask. He doesn't want to hear it come out of our mouths. He's not even in the little bit interested in us being servants. He just wants us to be sons. He just wants us to be daughters, because that's who we are. After we receive Jesus, we become sons and daughters. He's not even remotely interested in us becoming servants. He just wants us to know who we are. And you know what? If you know who you are as a son or a daughter of God, then that means you know who he is. And that's why I feel like he really wants us to know who we are. Because if we know who we are, that means we know who he is, because a son can't be a son without a father. A daughter can't be a daughter without a father. So if you realize that you're a son, you know you have a father. If you realize you're a daughter, you know you have a father. And man, it's just this full circle thing that keeps going back and forth of identity and worship and praise and acknowledgement of who God is to us in our lives. But he's not interested in what you can do. He's interested in who you can be, and who you are, and who he can make us to be through Jesus Christ. But right here in, let's see, what verse is it? In verse 22, whenever the father interrupts the son, he says quickly to one of his servants, this is so awesome. As the son is about to ask if he can be a servant, the father addresses one of his actual servants. Go and get a robe, sandals, and a ring for my son. And we could go all day on about what these things symbolize. The robe symbolizes, the mantle of grace and righteousness, or whatever you want to call it. The ring represents authority, and, all of these things. But that's not what I want to do today. What I want us to understand about this is that it was important, and let me tell you this: when the father ran out, he probably ran out beyond the village. And so what he wanted to do is he wanted to make sure that when his son re-entered the village, he wanted to make sure that his son looked like a son. The purpose in putting all of these things on his son was not just to make him look fancy. It wasn't just, there's symbolism there, but it's more than that. It's actually deeper than that. It's actually it's simpler than that. I feel like he just wanted his son to be distinguished from the servants. You and I are supposed to be distinguished from servants. We're not supposed to look like servants. We're not supposed to act like servants. We're not supposed to talk like servants. We're not supposed to feel like servants. We're supposed to be feeling, walking, talking, and acting like sons and daughters. We are supposed to be distinguished. And it's not just for us. It's for those who see us. Everyone else that sees us, we need to make sure that they don't see a servant. We need to make sure that they see a son. We need to make sure that they see a daughter, because that is what's going to draw them into the family of God. That's what's going to draw them to receiving Jesus. Nobody wants to become a servant. Who wants that? Like, we walk around living as servants and as slaves, and we think people are going to be enticed by that? That doesn't make sense to me, right? Nobody wants to be a servant. Nobody wants to be a slave, but everybody wants to be a son, and everybody wants to be a daughter. So it is important that you and I are distinguished from servants and slaves, so that the world can know that there's a family that is calling them, that there is a God that is calling them home. All right, now that we got fired up about that, I want to look at a different thing that happens here with the older son. I hope you guys are getting something. I am just all of this. I'm getting something. I really am. It's good to see everybody. I was just checking the chat to see if we got everybody watching here. All right, let's look at verse 25. Now his older son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. And he summoned one of the servants and began inquiring what these things could be. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound. But he became angry and was not willing to go in, and his father came out and began pleading with him. But he answered and said to his father, look, for so many years I have been serving you, and I have never neglected a command of yours, and yet you have never given me a young goat, so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your wealth with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, son, you have always been with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, for this brother of yours was dead and has begun to live, and was lost and has been found. Honestly, like, I know that those of us who have received Jesus, we are the found. But I honestly believe that if you continue to live outside of sonship, then you're still a little bit lost. Because the whole purpose of Jesus was to be adopted into the family of God. And I believe that it's more than just what happened to us. It is an awareness of what what has happened to us. It's an awareness of who we are now that we've received Jesus. So look at in verse 29, obviously we have the older brother complaining to one of the slaves. And in verse 29, the older brother says, "But he answered and said to his father, look, for so many years I have been serving you, and I have never neglected a command of yours. And yet you have never given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends." I want you to pay attention to what he says here. For so many years I have been serving you. For so many years I have been serving you, and I have never neglected a command of yours. What is so crazy about this is that the younger brother goes, wastes everything, comes back, gets received as a son, and this whole time, the older brother hasn't even been living as a son. He's been living as a servant. His relationship, the older brother's relationship to his father, was a master-servant relationship. It wasn't a father-son relationship. That's why he uses this against his father. I've been serving you. What about me? I've obeyed every command you've given me. What about me? That should tell us something, that God's looking for a relationship that's different than just obeying commands and serving. He's looking for something completely outside of that. And not only that, in verse 31, the father says, "Son, you've always been with me, and everything that I have is yours." You've always been with me, and everything that I have is yours. We learn in verse 11, again, he got his share of the estate too. He got his share of the estate. Not only did he get a share, he got double, probably got double what his younger brother got. And he's living as a servant still. His relationship to his father is still this master-servant relationship, right? This whole time, he has had his share of the estate right in front of him. What the father was saying here, as the son is like, "You never gave me a goat," the father is like, "You could have had a goat if you wanted a goat. Like, I already gave it to you. It's yours." And I feel like some of us are still living that way. We're still living the way that's like, I'm still asking for things that have already been given to me. I'm still trying to earn things that have already been given to me. I'm still trying to earn grace when it's already been given to me. I'm still trying to earn the love of the Father when it's already been given to me, right? Or authority. I'm still trying to earn authority through what I do. I still try to, many of us who have titles and positions, especially pastors, we're still trying to earn authority by expressing our title. I had somebody come across or come to our coffee shop like a year ago or so. And, the owner of the gathering place, the owner of the coffee shop was like, he made some comment to the other pastor about how he and I were both also pastors. And the guy said, "Yeah, but I mean real pastors." Like we feel like we still need to earn authority by throwing our title and our position around. I help out with youth. I help out with I'm the senior pastor. I lead worship, or I'm the kids pastor. I teach, whatever. I do Sunday school. It's like we try to throw this stuff around to try and earn authority. And it's like, God, that's part of your inheritance. Authority is part of your inheritance in the earth. And we're still living like servants instead of living like sons. The older brother was so busy being a servant that he missed out on the product of being a son. He was so busy being a servant that he missed out on the product of being a son. It's so crazy. And the whole time, he even got more than his younger brother. Man. This is just, this goes back to, I feel like we don't live as sons and we don't live as daughters. Probably has to do with the fact that we don't feel worthy to be called sons, because that's what it was for the younger brother here. That's what it was for the younger brother here. We don't feel worthy to be called sons. And so I'm like, why do we not feel worthy to be called sons? If we feel unworthy to be called sons, that means that we think that we're supposed to be worthy to be called sons. Because if we didn't feel like we had to be worthy to be called sons, there would be no reason to feel unworthy. There would be no reason to try and earn God in what we do, in our actions, in our works. There would be no reason for that. So why do some of us feel unworthy to be called sons? When I live as a servant, I actually deny the cross of Jesus, because it was the cross of Jesus that made me a son. When I identify myself as a servant, as a person of works, who God loves because of what he does, I deny the cross of Jesus Christ, because it was the cross that made me a son. It is the fundamental part of our faith. The cross adopted us. When we received the cross, it adopted us into the family of God, and we still live like we're not in his family. So why do we feel unworthy? Maybe we feel unworthy because of our sin, or maybe we feel unworthy because of our past. Maybe we feel unworthy because of fear. Like, there are a lot of different things that can make us feel this way. And I want to challenge us this morning. If maybe you're like, no, I live as a son. I want you to challenge yourself in this. Do you feel unworthy? Do you still try to earn God? Do you still try to earn sonship through works? And I want to say this especially to the older generation. Maybe you feel unworthy to be called a son, because you don't know what it's like to have a father embrace you. Maybe you feel unworthy to be called a son because your earthly father didn't embrace you, didn't love on you, didn't show affection to you. And maybe you're afraid of the ooey gooey, mushy gushy stuff, but this is the kind of God that God is. The father ran up to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. Some of you are afraid to get kissed by your father, and the father is trying to, because he wants to affirm your sonship and your identity in him. We have to stop trying to earn our identity in what we do. We have to stop identifying ourselves by our works. I am not a pastor. I am not a teacher. I am not a barista or a manager. I am a son of God. That is who I am. The things that I do actually are beneath that. The things that I do are a product of my awareness of sonship in God. And I promise you, if we can get that in this season, then when we come out of this season, there will be something so explosive take place. Because we will have a bunch of people doing a bunch of stuff. And that stuff is going to flow from a place of sonship, an awareness of sonship, an awareness of daughterhood. I don't know if that's a word, but it makes sense. But that's what I feel like will actually carry us into a revival. Is not somebody doing the next cool thing or the next innovative or creative thing. What's going to carry us into revival is those people, those men and women, those boys and girls who stand up and allow God to affirm their sonship and their daughterhood by allowing him to embrace them and to kiss them and to clothe them so that they can be distinguished from servants. God wants to replace the master-servant relationship. Maybe you refer to God all the time as God or Lord or King or Master or Teacher, all these different things that don't really imply a relationship. They just imply like an education or a job, an occupation. It's finally time for you to start referring to God as Father. It's finally time for us to start seeing him in that way. And I'm asking you, do not allow God as a father to be revealed to you through the filter of who your earthly father was or is. Because nobody on this earth can live up to who God is as a father. There's absolutely no way. But he wants to replace the master-servant relationship with a father-son relationship because there is an inheritance that is yet to be claimed. There is an inheritance that is yet to be claimed. Some of us are asking for goats, and God is saying, you already have it. Some of us are asking for healing, and God is saying, you already have it. Some of us are asking for prosperity, and God is saying, you already have it. I've shared it with you. The cross was your token and your open door into sonship. So I want that for us during this time. I want us to be reminded of this constantly, so that whenever we get out of this season, we're not just about what we do, but we are more about who we are, and the product of that will come. I promise. I just want to pray. I want to pray over our body. I want to pray over everybody watching, everybody that's going to be watching, that this would become real to us. Father, I thank you for the cross of Jesus Christ. I thank you for the cross of Jesus Christ and everything that he did, everything that Jesus did, everything that he stood for. God, I thank you that we don't have to fight for that stuff. We've received it when we received Jesus. We don't have to work for it. We don't have to earn things. God, I ask that those who feel unworthy to be called sons, God, that you would wipe that away, that you would just completely break that off. God, and that you would restore an awareness of who they are in Jesus Christ. Lord, I thank you that after this, we are going to see some amazing, explosive things happen for the kingdom of God, and it will be done by sons and daughters. It will not be done by slaves and servants. Father, if we have become calloused to your affection, Lord, I ask that you would just rub that away. I ask that you would just rub that away, God. Just rub it away. Smooth it off. And those who are afraid of affection or afraid of love, God, I ask you to break through that barrier and begin to show the sons and daughters of the King how loved they are. Lord, I ask during this time when things are shut down around us and the world is quiet, Lord, that your voice would become more real, that you would increase the volume of your voice, and that the sons would know that they are sons and the daughters would know that they are daughters. I ask for emotional healing, God, spiritual healing, the healing of the soul and the mind to happen right now. Lord, I thank you for my church, and I thank you for every person in it, and every person that's going with us, God, wherever we're going. I ask you to bless each and every person watching, and that you would go with us, God. Thank you. We worship you. We thank you for everything that you are, everything that you do for us, and everything you're still doing for us, God. We love you, Jesus. Amen.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to this message by Pastor Josh Cotts. We pray it blesses and encourages you throughout the week. If you'd like to know more about Living Word Church and the ministries associated with it, please visit our website at livingwordshawnee.org.